Communism. You've heard the word a million times, right? It's shaped entire nations, kicked off revolutions, and pretty much defined a whole century. But behind all the headlines in the history books, what does it actually mean? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack that exact question. We're going to trace the idea all the way from its theoretical roots to how it plays out in the real world.
So, let's just start at the very beginning. What is communism? Before we dive into all the history and the politics, let's strip it all the way back to its core idea. Let's build our understanding from the ground up.
Okay, so at its absolute heart, communism is an idea built on equality. And the ultimate goal? It's a society where the means of production, things like factories, farms, tools, all that stuff, are owned together by the workers. In this perfect ideal world, there would be no social classes, no money, no private property. It's a truly radical vision for how society could work.
But, to really get a grip on this idea, you have to understand what it was designed to replace. See, communism didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a direct reaction to capitalism. So let's put the two systems side by side and see how they stack up.
And this slide just lays out the fundamental clash perfectly, doesn't it? On one side, you've got capitalism, which is defined by a class structure. You have the working class, called the proletariat, and the owning class, the bourgeoisie. But the communist ideal, over on the other side, imagines the complete opposite, a society with no classes, no state, where the workers are the ones in charge. The really crucial difference here is that big shift in ownership and power, from private hands to the collective.
So how does a theory like this actually leap off the page and into the real world? Well, it wasn't a slow burn, I'll tell you that. It was more like a series of explosive historical events that completely redrew the map of the 20th century. This timeline shows you what I mean.
It all really kicks off in 1848 with the Communist Manifesto, and for decades it was this really powerful theory, but in 1917 it became a reality. That's when Lenin and the Bolsheviks established the Soviet Union, and from there the momentum was just incredible. China in 49, Cuba in 59. I mean, at its peak, about a third of the entire world lived under governments that were trying to build communism. But, as you can see on the timeline, the end of the century brought this huge, dramatic reversal with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Now, when these revolutionary governments actually took power, they had to create a whole new kind of state to put their ideas into practice. This wasn't that stateless utopia that Marx imagined. Not yet, anyway. It was meant to be a transitional phase. So let's pop the hood and dissect the anatomy of that state.
And this brings us to a really key term, the Marxist-Leninist state. These places are run by a single communist party, which sees itself as the vanguard party, basically the dedicated, enlightened group that's leading the working class. It's also super important to understand that these countries usually call themselves socialist because they see their system as a transition towards that final goal of communism.
So how does this vanguard party actually govern? They use a principle called democratic centralism, and the key is right there in the name. The democratic part is supposed to happen first. Leaders are elected, policies get debated, but once a decision is made, that's when the centralism part kicks in. All debate stops, the minority has to go along with the majority, and decisions from the top are absolutely 100% binding on everyone below. It's a system designed for total unity, but in practice, it becomes the foundation of the one-party state. This principle directly shapes all the institutions. So at the very top, you have the Communist Party, which is constitutionally the leading force. And then below that, you've got the Supreme Legislature. Now, this is where things get really different from most systems you might be used to. Instead of a separation of powers, it holds what's called unified power. That means all legislative, executive, and judicial authority is all smashed together into this one supreme body. There are no checks and balances.
And this quote from Mao Zedong just perfectly captures the ultimate power dynamic. The party commands the gun, and the gun must never be allowed to command the party. This isn't just a simple policy, it's the absolute foundational principle that political power always stays supreme over military power.
Like any major political movement, communism developed its own really powerful visual language. These symbols became an instant global shorthand for the entire ideology. The color red is probably the most famous, symbolizing the blood of workers in their struggle. You also see the red star all over the place, and you hear that famous anthem, the Internationale. But the most iconic symbol of them all, of course, has to be the hammer and sickle.
And its meaning is actually beautifully simple. The hammer stands for industrial workers, and the sickle represents agricultural workers, the peasants. When you cross them together, they symbolize the Revolutionary Alliance,
the unity of these two huge laboring classes in their shared fight.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall, it really seemed like this whole chapter of history was closing for good. But that brings us to today. Where does communism actually stand in the world right now?
Well, the answer is 5. Today, just 5 states are officially governed by a ruling communist party. That is a massive shift from the peak of the 20th century.
And here they are, China, Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam. But, and this is a really important but, while the political parties are communist, the economies have often changed dramatically. I mean, look at China. It's integrated so many principles of a market economy that some people call its system a mixed economy, or even state capitalism.
And that brings us right to the central paradox of communism in practice. You have an ideology that in theory is aiming for the withering away of the state. But in every single historical case, it has produced some of the most powerful and centralized states the world has ever known. So why is that? That's the big question really worth thinking about.